The observation deck was designed for passing through, not staying, which was obvious from the way the seats curved just enough to be uncomfortable, and the stars outside looked carefully framed, like they'd been edited for people who didn't want to feel too small. I was there because my ship was late, the station clocks were arguing with one another, and my translator implant had decided that day to hum faintly whenever I felt annoyed, which meant it was humming constantly. I was considering whether I could file a complaint against a piece of technology embedded in my skull when someone sat down beside me. She did it casually, without the cautious pause most aliens used around humans, as if we'd been sharing benches our entire lives. At first glance she looked human enough, same symmetry, same relaxed posture. But then she turned her head slightly and I saw her ears, long and smooth, tapering back instead of rounding off. They twitched once, like they were adjusting to the ambient noise of the station, and then settled. I tried not to stare. I failed briefly, recovered poorly, and decided the safest course of action was pretending this happened to me all the time. "Is it always this quiet?" she asked. "Or did I accidentally sit in the existential wing?" Her voice came through the implant warm and unfiltered, which meant either the tech was behaving for once, or she was speaking one of the core trade languages. "This is the 'please contemplate infinity while waiting for delayed transport' section," I said. "Very popular with people questioning their life choices." She smiled at that, not politely, but like she actually meant it. "Then we're in the right place. I'm avoiding my life choices." I laughed before I thought about it. We watched a cargo freighter fold space in the distance, light bending in on itself like it was embarrassed to exist. A maintenance drone drifted past the viewport and stalled, as if it too had lost motivation. My implant misfired and translated something on a nearby announcement board as "please refrain from emotional outbursts near the airlocks," which felt uncomfortably personal. "You're human," she said, not as a question. "Guilty, you." "Complicated," she replied, and glanced at her ears as if they were an afterthought. "People tend to ask about those." I was going to pretend I was incredibly worldly and not notice, I said. "But yes, I noticed." She laughed a quick sound and leaned back. "They help with listening, culturally, biologically too, but mostly culturally." "That feels like a design upgrade we skipped," I said. "We mostly perfected talking." Her ears twitched again, amused. We talked after that like people killing time. About bad station food engineered to offend every species equally. About gravity fields that were always just a little wrong. About how strange it was that entire civilizations could cross galaxies but still couldn't agree on seating comfort. She listened closely, really listened, like my words mattered more than the stars outside. I found myself saying things I didn't usually say to strangers, and she didn't interrupt, except once to make a joke about rulers who forgot how to sit beside someone without standing taller. I didn't ask who she was. She didn't ask who I was. The deck stayed quiet, the universe behaved itself for a while, and for reasons I couldn't explain, that felt rare. She asked me what I did when I wasn't stranded between departures, and I told her the truth, which was that I moved cargo schedules from one blinking column to another, and occasionally prevented minor interstellar incidents by catching a typo before it became a treaty violation. She nodded with genuine interest, which was unsettling, because no one had ever looked impressed by spreadsheets that could start wars. When I apologized for boring her, she said boredom was a privilege, and that most people in her world would pay dearly for 5 uninterrupted minutes of it. I wasn't sure if that was a joke, but she smiled like it was. A soft chime rippled through the deck as artificial gravity recalibrated, just enough to make my stomach briefly consider rebellion. Somewhere above us, a ship misjumped and corrected itself with a flash that looked like reality clearing its throat. She followed the movement with her eyes, ears angling slightly, and said, "That captain is either very brave or very bad at math." My implant helpfully translated something else at the same time, announcing that unauthorized heroics will be fined, which felt related. We fell into a rhythm that surprised me. Conversation usually felt like navigation through debris, careful, slow. But with her, it moved easily, looping from small things to large ones and back again. She asked how humans handled disagreement, and I told her we mostly argued loudly until someone got tired or invented a new acronym. She said her people preferred silence, which I said explained the ears. She countered that humans compensated with facial expressions, which she found alarmingly expressive, especially eyebrows. I tried to demonstrate restraint and failed within seconds. A pair of station security officers passed by, slowed, and then continued on, pretending not to notice us while very clearly noticing her. I noticed them noticing and suddenly became aware that I might be sitting wrong, though I had no idea how to sit correctly in an interspecies context. She caught my glance and rolled her eyes. "They worry too much," she said. "I've never spontaneously exploded." "That's comforting," I said. "I like my benches explosion-free." She laughed again, and for a moment the station noise seemed to dim around us. She told me she liked places like this because people forgot who they were supposed to be. I said I came because no one expected anything from me here, not even competence. She considered that and said expectation was the heaviest form of gravity, harder to escape than any well. I told her that sounded like something written on a monument. She shrugged and said monuments were usually erected to remind people of things they were actively ignoring. My implant hiccuped and translated her next sentence 3 seconds late, causing an awkward pause where we both stared at the stars like they might intervene. When the words finally arrived, they were gentle, asking whether I believed positions of power changed people or just revealed them. I answered honestly, with a joke I didn't quite mean, saying power mostly revealed who shouldn't have it. She smiled, but there was something thoughtful behind it, something older than the station, than the ships outside, than the small, temporary bench we shared. An announcement echoed that my ship would be delayed again. I groaned. She tilted her head and said, "Good," as if that were obviously the correct response. For reasons I couldn't yet explain, I agreed. Time behaved strangely after that, stretching and compressing like it was unsure whether to take us seriously. Another ship arrived, then didn't, its arrival gate flickering between green and apologetic amber. The station lights dimmed to simulate a local dusk from a planet neither of us had ever visited, and for a moment the stars outside looked softer, less judgmental. She shifted slightly on the bench, close enough that I became aware of her warmth, which felt inconveniently grounding for a place floating between systems. She asked me, casually, what I thought leadership was for. I said that depended heavily on whether you were asking the leader or the people being led. She laughed and said that was already better than most answers she received. I told her I suspected leadership existed mainly to absorb blame, like cosmic insulation. She considered this seriously, then said that was an underappreciated function and might steal it later. I told her I'd like credit, preferably in a small footnote somewhere far away from danger. As we talked, more things began to feel slightly off, though I couldn't have said how. The environmental controls adjusted more often near us. A service drone hovered, retreated, then hovered again, as if indecisive. Once, when she leaned forward to gesture, the deck lights subtly brightened, and then dimmed again when she sat back. I noticed these things the way you notice a tune repeating in a song, vaguely, without understanding why. I joked that the station seemed nervous. She smiled and said it was probably just shy. We spoke about borders, the invisible kind and the ones enforced by fleets. She said most lines in the galaxy were drawn by people who never had to stand on them. I said humans specialized in that too, and that we were very efficient at exporting discomfort. My implant briefly mistranslated something she said as ceremonial disappointment, which made me laugh until my eyes watered. She waited patiently for the implant to correct itself, which felt generous, as if she were used to waiting for systems to catch up. At one point I asked her if she was important. I meant it jokingly, but the word landed heavier than I expected. She paused, just a fraction too long, and then said importance was relative and usually inconvenient. I told her that sounded like a yes. She shrugged and said that sometimes you were important in rooms you never entered, to people you never met, and that it was a strange way to exist. I made a joke about preferring to be important to my houseplant, which was currently surviving out of spite. She laughed, softer this time. Another group of security officers passed, slower than before. One of them inclined their head toward her without seeming to realize they'd done it. She raised an eyebrow at me, as if sharing a private joke, and I felt a flicker of something I couldn't name. Curiosity, maybe, or the faint sense that I was sitting beside a story much larger than I'd assumed. I asked if she always traveled alone. She said alone was easier, quieter, and less honest. I said that didn't sound easier at all. When the announcement came that her departure was ready, it didn't name a destination, just a clearance tone I hadn't heard before, deep and resonant. She stood, smoothing her clothes, and for a moment the deck seemed to straighten with her. She looked down at me and said she'd enjoyed being ordinary for a while. I told her she was very good at it. She smiled, and something in that smile felt like a held breath, waiting. I stood too, mostly out of politeness, and partly because the tone that had echoed through the deck made my knees think this was a situation that required standing. The sound lingered in the air like a low note played on something too large to see, and conversations around us thinned, then stopped altogether, as if the station itself had decided to listen. I opened my mouth to say something casual, maybe a goodbye that didn't imply galactic significance, and that was when everything went wrong in a very orderly way. From the far end of the deck, a line of figures emerged, moving with a precision that suggested they had rehearsed this moment extensively and were deeply offended that I was in the frame. Their clothing wasn't flashy, but it carried weight, fabrics reacting subtly to the light, symbols shifting as if alive. The security officers I'd noticed earlier straightened so abruptly one of them nearly saluted a wall. I glanced at her, confused, and she gave me an apologetic look, the kind you give someone right before explaining that you've accidentally set their kitchen on fire. Someone spoke her name. Not loudly, but with a gravity that made the air feel thicker. The word traveled fast, and I felt it hit me a second later, right behind the eyes, where understanding goes when it doesn't want to be understood. Queen. The translator didn't soften it, didn't offer synonyms, just delivered it clean and devastating. I did what any reasonable person would do in that moment. I froze completely and reviewed, in painful detail, every sentence I'd said in the last hour. I had joked about management. I had critiqued leadership. I had compared power to bad gravity. I briefly considered pretending to faint, but I'd never fainted before and didn't want to start now in front of interstellar royalty. She turned to face the approaching group, posture shifting almost imperceptibly, like a star going from background to center stage. The bench behind us suddenly felt very small and very illegal. She looked back at me before anyone reached her. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what?" I whispered, still not moving. "Don't apologize," she said. "It would ruin the conversation." That somehow made it worse and better at the same time. The delegation arrived, heads bowed, voices layered with formality and ritual phrases my implant struggled to keep up with. She acknowledged them with practiced ease, but there was no warmth there, no jokes, no shared eye rolls. It was like watching someone put on gravity. When she finished, she gestured slightly, and the group halted, waiting. "This is my friend," she said, and the word friend landed harder than Queen ever could have. Every gaze turned to me. I gave a small, helpless wave, the universal signal for I did not consent to this level of attention. Someone looked like they wanted to object. She didn't give them time. She thanked them, dismissed them, and the deck slowly remembered how to breathe. When she turned back to me, the weight eased. "You see," she said lightly, "this is why I like benches." I swallowed. "You're the queen." She nodded, "Yes." I told you rulers shouldn't be worshipped, I said weakly. She smiled just a little. And I told you I was avoiding my life choices. After that, silence sat between us, awkward and alert, like it had been promoted without warning. I was suddenly very aware of my hands, which felt underqualified for the moment, and of the bench, which I suspected was not rated for supporting a queen and a man who had just insulted leadership theory in front of her. She seemed to notice my internal collapse and sat back down as if nothing irreversible had occurred, smoothing the moment with the same ease she'd smoothed her clothes earlier. "You're recalculating," she said. "I'm catastrophizing," I replied. "It's a human specialty. We do it recreationally." She smiled at that and folded her hands in her lap. Up close, now that I knew what she was, nothing about her changed, and that somehow made it worse. Her long ears were relaxed, angled slightly forward, attentive in a way that felt unfair. "If it helps," she said, "most people freeze because they think they're suddenly being evaluated." "Am I asked. "Not anymore," she said. "You already passed or failed, depending on who you ask." "That's not comforting." "It's honest." Around us, the station returned to its carefully managed indifference. A child of some species I didn't recognize chased a floating advertisement until it glitched and fled. A cargo handler argued with an automated loader that refused to acknowledge sarcasm. Life, stubborn and unimpressed by royalty, continued. She watched it with something like relief. "I don't usually tell people," she said. "Not like that." "I didn't usually critique monarchies," I said. "Today's been very educational." She laughed, quiet and genuine. "You spoke to me like a person. That is rarer than you think. Titles change the way sound travels. Words arrive bent." "I did wonder why the lights kept reacting to you," I said. "I thought the station was flirting." "It does that," she replied. "The systems are keyed to me. Security, climate, probability algorithms, it's exhausting." "Probability algorithms. Minor ones," she said. "They reduce assassination attempts by nudging chance, misplaced tools, late elevators, sudden diarrhea." I stared at her. "That's remarkably specific." "It's very effective," she said mildly. We talked then, carefully at first, then less so. She explained her people valued listening above speaking, that the ears were a reminder as much as an organ. Leaders were trained to hear discomfort before dissent. I told her humans usually waited until someone was shouting. She said she'd noticed. I joked that shouting was our early warning system. She countered that it was a terrible one. She asked if knowing who she was changed anything. I considered it. "It explains a lot," I said. "But no, you're still the person who laughed at my houseplant joke." "Good," she said. "I'd hate to lose that." The announcement came that my ship was finally boarding. I didn't move. She noticed and her smile softened. "This is where it becomes a story," she said, "and stories end." "Some don't," I said. "They just echo." Her ears angled forward again, listening, and for a moment the universe felt like it was doing the same. She didn't tell me to stay, and I didn't pretend I wasn't considering it. My boarding notice pulsed gently against my wrist, polite and persistent, like it believed I might still be a responsible adult. She watched it with interest, then said, "You know, if you miss it, several systems will quietly panic." "That feels like a lot of pressure for a seat in economy," I said. "It's not the seat," she replied. "It's the pattern. People like predictability." "I've been disappointing people consistently for years," I said. "I'm very practiced." That earned a smile. We walked together toward the edge of the deck, not close enough to draw attention, not far enough to feel like a goodbye yet. As we moved, doors opened a fraction sooner than they should have. Pathways cleared without announcement. I pretended not to notice. She pretended I was doing a good job of it. "I want to ask you something," she said, and slowed just enough to make it matter. "And you can refuse. People rarely get to refuse me." "That's unsettling," I said, "but go on." "If positions disappeared tomorrow," she said, "no crowns, no councils, no inherited authority, what would you build first?" I didn't answer right away. My implant suggested 3 responses, all terrible. I ignored it. I'd build places to sit, I said finally. Places where people who aren't supposed to meet can waste time together, because that's where the honest stuff leaks out. She stopped walking. For a second I thought I'd miscalculated something important like gravity. Then she laughed, a sound edged with surprise. That, she said, is deeply inconvenient. I have a gift. She turned to face the stars, hands clasped behind her back. Most empires collapse because they mistake obedience for stability, she said. What you're describing would terrify my advisors. That's usually a good sign, I said. They would call it dangerous, she added. I prefer structurally challenging. She looked at me then, really looked, ears angled forward, listening with her whole attention. You speak like someone who doesn't expect to be remembered. That's because I wasn't planning on it. The boarding call chimed again, sharper this time. A ship outside folded space, slipping away like it had overheard too much. She nodded toward the gate. If you go, she said, nothing official will come of this. No records, no declarations. And if I do? She smiled. Still nothing official, just more paperwork. I sighed. You make rebellion sound very dull. It usually is, she said. The interesting part is before anyone notices. I took a step back, then another. For what it's worth, I said, I'd vote for you in any system. She tilted her head. That implies choice. Exactly. When I turned toward the gate, I felt it then. Not regret, not quite, but the weight of a moment that would keep moving even after I did. Behind me, systems adjusted. Somewhere far away, probability shifted slightly, as if considering a new idea. Life went back to normal in the aggressive way it always does, like it resents having been interrupted. My ship arrived. My job still involved preventing spreadsheets from becoming weapons, and the universe continued expanding without consulting me. For a while, I convinced myself the bench, the queen, the improbable conversation had all been a side effect of station air mixed with fatigue. This worked until subtle things started changing. It began with invitations that didn't make sense, surveys asking my opinion on interspecies transit design, a request to review seating layouts for diplomatic chambers, which I assumed was a prank until the paperwork refused to laugh with me. Somewhere between that and a memo titled Informal Contact Zones, Pilot Program, I realized the universe had remembered me even if I hadn't asked it to. I watched the news more closely after that. Not the loud announcements, but the quiet shifts. Councils expanding, protocols rewritten to include pauses, not speeches. A queen appeared less often in public addresses, and when she did, she listened longer than she spoke. Commentators called it strategy. Analysts called it weakness. I smiled and called it a bench. My houseplant died, despite my renewed commitment to personal growth, which felt humbling and appropriate. I named its replacement Listening Post 1 and spoke to it occasionally. It did not respond, but I felt better anyway. Months later, on a station halfway to nowhere, I found a familiar curve of uncomfortable seating and sat down without thinking. The stars were louder there, the kind that made you feel overheard. I didn't expect anyone to join me. That was the point. When someone did, I laughed first, then looked. She didn't wear symbols this time. No gravity followed her in. Just long ears, relaxed, and a smile that suggested she'd been waiting to be ordinary again. You look less surprised, she said. I've lowered my expectations, I replied. It's very freeing. We talked. Not about policy, not about power, but about how strange it was that worlds could change direction, because two people decided not to stand when they were told to. She told me the benches were spreading. I told her I expected royalties. She said she'd see what probability could do. When it was time to part, it felt complete, not heavy. I understood then that nothing had been taken from me, only added. I stood differently now. I listened more. And somewhere between the stars and the stations, the universe had learned, just a little, how to sit down.